Hello, my name is Amanda McGuinness. I'm an autistic ADHD PDA adult. I'm also parent to four multi-neurodivergent children. The topic of why we should be humanizing language in the early years is one very close to my own heart. My youngest son, Connor, I suppose in the photographs on your screen right now, these would be photos of my children many years ago when they're much younger than they are now. My eldest child now is almost 19 and my youngest child is almost 9. So you can think that these photos are from times gone by. But I suppose those experiences that I had when my children were young and were in the early years still, I suppose, stay with me now as an adult. My youngest son, Connor, that I referred to earlier, he was the youngest child in County Mayo. I'm based in Ireland, depending on where you're watching this presentation. So it's a county in Ireland. My son, Connor, would have been, I believe, the youngest child ever identified as autistic at that time. So he would have been identified as autistic before he was one. And I learned very, very quickly, unfortunately, that when a child is viewed to be different, when a child is potentially known to have a disability, for a variety of reasons that I may never understand, individuals, professionals may consider it's okay to talk in a very unkind way about children that are different. And I suppose that's why I want to talk to you today about humanizing language in the early years. So I'll go back a little bit in time. My youngest son, Connor, I referred to the fact that he was the youngest child in County Mayo identified as autistic. It was only 2 weeks after my young son was identified as autistic that a lady approached me in a local store. Now, I wouldn't have seen this lady for possibly 20 years of my life, maybe a little bit less than that, perhaps maybe 15 years, even less again. But this lady approached me in a store and she referred to the fact that she had, inverted commas, heard locally, and this is the old language, that my son, inverted commas, had autism. And I remember just thinking it's very strange that someone would know this private information about my child. And I went, okay. And then she said, I said to my mom, and excuse my language, I'm going to repeat what this lady said. She said, but it's okay. I said to my mom, it's okay. Excuse my language now. She said, he's not a complete vegetable because at least he can walk. But what this lady did not realize is that at that time in my son's life, he was not able to walk. In all the 20 years since, we have had repeated incidents and experiences of negativity around language. And I suppose that's what brought me here today to talk to you about this very important topic, because as early years educators, we may be a family's first point of contact in understanding that their child may be neurodivergent. And it's really, really important that the language that we use about difference and the language that we use about disability is neuroaffirmative. I can only tell you from my own lived experience the impact that language has had on my life, on my children's lives, and the negative experiences that I would have had engaging with professionals in the early years, I suppose, across the spectrum of my children's lives. All of those words, all of those interactions would have positively or negatively affected me. And also, if I didn't have the knowledge base that I have on autism, and if I wasn't I suppose, an autism specialist, I may view my children really negatively if I was to take on board the language and the words that, say, professionals had used regarding each of my four children over the course of their lives. So I suppose let's talk a little bit more throughout this presentation about why we need to consider, as early years educators, specifically in this context, about using language in a really humanizing way and to really consider our impact as incredible early years educators on the families and in particular on the incredible children in our settings. Why every word matters. The language we use every day shapes far more than our conversations. So just consider every word you say has a positive or negative impact, not only on the family, but on the child in your setting. For example, the words that we say help to shape the children's developing identities, how parents view positively or negatively their children, the family relationships, professional expectations, opportunities for participation, how colleagues understand children, the support children receive. Language is never just words. It reflects how we understand children, families, and our role as educators. So again, thinking about the impact of the words that we say. And I can tell you, as a parent, 20 years down the line, as a professional working in this area for countless years, I know professionally and personally the impact of the words that I choose to say. And I'm very careful all of the time with the language and the words that I choose to say, because I understand innately as an autistic person, but also as a parent of multi-neurodivergent children, the impact negatively, but also positively, the words that we say. What's the key message? What are we saying really? What's inferred by what I'm saying? So be very cautious with your language and always consider to use strengths-focused language, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on. Every interaction tells a story. Throughout their early years, every child has a story told about them. As professionals, we tell their stories through conversation with family, maybe with the child themselves, maybe with another child in the setting about this particular child that perhaps is neurodivergent, through our observations that we conduct and that we tell others about or that we write down, maybe in the reports that we create, maybe in the requests for support for the child that we create, maybe in the transition documents when a child is leaving our setting, maybe to go to primary or to another setting, maybe in the emails that we write in support of the child, maybe in the meetings with the families and conversations with their colleagues and other professionals. If you think about it, really, the language that we use about a child that's developing differently, we can use humane, strengths focused language, and we can be acutely aware of the impact of the language that we're using has on a family. I'll often say, as a professional, when I go into an earlier setting, um, we'll model and role play different examples of language and to use or maybe to not use. And often in an earlier setting, I'll hear a professional say, well, when I say to the family, I have concerns. And I'll always say it'd be more helpful if you don't say, I have concerns. Because if you're concerned about the child, you're now concerning the family about the child. And although, yes, we want families, if it is our role and if it is within our remit, to understand our viewpoint professionally about the child, we can give them that information in a strengths focused way. I have noticed, for example, if I was speaking about myself, if I was a professional, I have noticed that Amanda has a keen interest in playing with Lego. I have noticed that Amanda communicates really creatively. I have noticed that Amanda is developing differently to her peers in the room. That's still giving the family good information, insightful information, professional knowledge base about my development, but it's not in any which way creating a narrative or a story about me as a child in your setting that is negative. Each interaction contributes to how children are understood by others. Our responsibility as early years educators is to ensure those stories reflect dignity, curiosity, strengths, and possibility. The language we use reflects the lens we see through. So the language that we're using, whether in written, verbal, or text format, however we're communicating and telling stories or information about a child in our setting, will reflect our knowledge base, our professionalism, and our viewpoint on that child. You can see in the, slide in front of you, my gorgeous Jack from many, many years ago. We had an early years educator come into the home to support Jack. And I remember taking that photo while she was singing a song in the background to him. She wasn't saying, oh, he's not giving me eye contact, he's not socializing in a typical way. She was engaging with him in a way that supported his processing. She knew that her singing, it was actually it was a song called Wheels on the Bus. She was singing that in the background gently to him while he was regulating, and he loves bubbles. So I was blowing bubbles, trying to take a photo, and she was singing this beautiful song with her beautiful voice. But at no time was she saying he's not able to sit still, he's not speaking a lot or not speaking at all, because at that point in Jack's life he was non-speaking. In no way was the language that she was using negative about my son to me or to Jack directly. When I read reports that she would have written about Jack later in his life, I never read words about him that she wrote that were negative. She was viewing him as the absolutely beautiful, individual, creative, neurodivergent child that he was. Every conversation we have about a child matters. The words we use with families, the language we use with colleagues, the observations we write, the reports we complete, the emails we send. You'll see a lot of repetition in what I'm saying today because I have unfortunately had the negative experience of documentation that I've read in other settings about my child, especially my beautiful Connor, that was really, really inhumane, really just horrible to read about my child, the way that they were being referred to. And I looked to my left there because there's a notebook there that I found recently that an individual had. I won't show you the front of it now because their name might be on it. This is a really old book that I had found. I was moving things around here in the office one day and it fell out of a box. It was I suppose, a communication journal an individual had in regards to my son many years ago. And when I was reading through the language that they were using about him, it hit me in the heart, because that would tell me if that's how they view him in the writing of his story about his day, how are they viewing him day to day when they were supporting him in the setting. Before we speak, we can ask ourselves, am I describing objectively what I am observing? Am I making assumptions? Does my language preserve dignity? Does it help others understand this child? Would I feel respected if these words described myself or my own child? The language we choose reflects not only how we see children, but how others will come to see them as well. Language shapes professional practice. The words we choose influence far more than our conversations. They shape what we as professionals notice. They shape what we become curious about. They shape the questions we ask. They shape the support we offer. They shape the opportunities children experience. They shape how families feel. This list is non-exhaustive. Ultimately, they shape the culture we create within our settings. Language does not simply describe our practice. It becomes part of our practice. You'll see in the photo on the screen there my beautiful Max from many years ago in my actual living room here in my home. My beautiful Max was lining up his toys, and I remember taking the photo, being really struck by how beautiful it was to watch him so relaxed, so content, having so much felt safety that he could just do what brought his heart so much joy, or what I would use in autistic language. It was a glimmer in his day that he was, I suppose, investing his time in. It made me a little bit sad as well, because I can remember when so Max is my youngest, Connor is my oldest son, Max is my youngest son. I can remember, we'll say 13, 14 years earlier, when my beautiful Connor would have lined up toys, we would have been advised, again, this was the old knowledge, we would have been advised to help him play normally, that wasn't a normal way to play, and that he would never be normal if we didn't have Connor play in the way that, say, neurotypical, that would be in this context, non-neurodivergent people would play. And I remember pushing back against that advice all those years ago and feeling shamed and feeling judged. And now, obviously, almost 20 years later, realizing that I was correct, but I didn't have, I suppose, maybe the courage to say out loud what I thought. I just agreed with the person, but later wept and thought, wow, they really don't see my beautiful Connor the way that I see him. He's the most beautiful, creative, courageous young little person that I could ever hope to have. And I suppose that particular day I took this photo of my beautiful Max many years, I suppose, into the future, after, I suppose, my gorgeous Connor had grown up. I remember just feeling, okay, I've got it right now. And at this point in my life with my sons, any professional that would be working with my children, I would tell them very, directly, that it's really important that they use really neuroaffirmative, humankind, strengths focused language about my children, because the words that they're saying will create worlds around my child, and that I want the world around my child and the story about my child to be strengths focused. I can absolutely acknowledge and identify that my children do experience challenges, but they themselves are not challenging. They're living in a world that has not been created for them. The stories children hear about themselves. Children may not hear every professional conversation, but they experience the beliefs behind our words. Families hear how we describe their children. Colleagues build their understanding through the language we use. Documentation carries our descriptions into future classrooms, settings, and services. Over time, these words shape expectations, relationships, and opportunities. The language we choose today contributes to the story children may come to believe about themselves in the future. You can see on the screen there, when I think about understanding shapes our language, my beautiful Jack, who is 12 today, I suppose, in today's world. At this point in his life, there's different photos of him over different stages of his life. In all of the photos, except for the one where he has, we'll say, a red jumper on, and another one where, to the very right of my screen, where he has a big towel out on the ground and he has a wicker basket beside him. In all the other photos during this stage of his life, he would have been non-speaking. In the two photos I identified for you, he was now learning to use language verbally. But I suppose the reason I wanted to point this out to you is that at no point throughout the course of his life did I ever allow for anyone nor myself, nor anyone in my family, to use language negatively about the way that my beautiful Jack played and understood and experienced and interacted in the world. My beautiful Jack absolutely experiences challenges day to day. His disabilities absolutely can challenge him day to day, but that's not his fault. He's living in a world that has not been created for him. So when I talk about language, what I'm really saying as a parent is that if my viewpoint on my child is so positive, it would be very important and critical that your language and your understanding of the child is equally as neuroaffirmative, that you see the whole child, that you're trying to attune with the child. Maybe you don't understand why my beautiful Jack is lining up all of his toys all throughout his life. I understand why he does that. It brings him a sense of peace and calm, and it helps him make sense of the world. And that, I think, personally, is such a beautiful thing to understand about a child. And what you can do as an early years educator is you can learn to attune to the child in front of you and to help them have what's called felt safety with you, that they can co-regulate with you and realize that it's okay for themselves to be their incredible true self. You can see on the screen now my beautiful Jack. I think this is when he was 10. So this is now 10 years after the photos you saw on the slide before, to this day, and he's 12 now, but even 2 years ago, he was lining up all of his little cars and toys, and out in the hallway there in our hall, I can actually see, you can't see, but I know what was behind that pink wall is more, I suppose, trucks and tractors. The point of it is can you imagine if all those years ago, I was telling him to play properly, to have eye contact. Why are you doing that? Why can't you be normal? Can you imagine if I ever used any of that language, the impact that that would have had on his mental health, on his sense of self, on his identity? If I was a professional saying these things, if I said to a parent, listen, Jack isn't playing properly, I've concerns, I've seen some red flags, even just saying those words, can you kind of get a sense of the anxiety that you cause the parent? Yes, it is important that parents understand if a child is developing differently. Absolutely, that's important. But can we give that information to families in a neuroaffirmative way, in a humanizing way, so that we can understand for the family what the language they're retrieving from our conversations with them is going to have on them, positive or negative, but also in relation to how they view their child going forward. The language we choose is shaped by the way we understand children. When we view children through a lens of curiosity, we begin to notice their strengths, interests, unique ways of communicating, and I would say, looking at the picture of my beautiful Jack, unique ways of playing. We become more attentive to their environments, relationships, and experiences that influence participation and well-being. Rather than searching for problems to fix, we seek to deepen our understanding of the whole child. When understanding comes first, language naturally becomes more respectful, compassionate, and humanizing. More than words, neuroaffirmative language is about far more than choosing different vocabulary. This goes back to everything that I've said so far. It reflects the way we understand children. It shapes the relationships we build with families. It influences the culture we create within our settings. It communicates what we value as professionals. When our language is grounded in curiosity, respect, and understanding, it becomes a powerful tool for creating environments where every child feels seen, heard, and valued. Language that humanizes. The words we choose influence how children are understood by others. Small changes in language can create a very different understanding. Humanizing language encourages us to focus on understanding rather than judgment. For example, I would recommend that you don't say attention seeking. Instead, think about seeking connection. Think about these words and how it changes your viewpoint of a child, maybe that you're thinking of right now. I would recommend you don't use obsessive, and maybe talk about having a passionate interest. Instead of saying somebody has a tendency to keep rigid routines, you might notice instead that Amanda prefers predictability and familiarity. Instead of saying that Amanda has poor attention, you might say Amanda sustains attention differently, depending on interest, meaning, and context. If you're noticing my beautiful Max there in the photograph playing with, I believe that was not castor sugar. Oh my goodness, I can't think of the name of it. I don't want to make up a word. It's the sugar that you would use, icing sugar and cocoa powder. I was trying to think what it was. My beautiful Max in our front porch in our little cottage a couple of summers ago was playing with icing sugar, cocoa powder. It was, I suppose, homemade edible mud. If you didn't understand sensory processing differences and maybe didn't understand diverse ways of playing that many neurodivergent children might engage in, you might consider maybe that's not appropriate play. Or you might think he's delayed playing skills because he loves, absolutely to this day, still adores sensory play. Instead of saying Max has delayed play skills, because you're neuroaffirmative, you might say Max is demonstrating a different pattern of play. And that's absolutely correct because he is, and it's absolutely unique and beautiful just like he is. You might notice that Max prefers to play on his own and likes to sit beside other people as they play, but maybe not engage directly with them. So instead of saying Max has poor social skills, you might notice instead, and this will hopefully reframe your thinking on it as well, that Max communicates and connects in his own unique way. Words carry meaning. The words we choose do more than describe children. They communicate our understanding as professionals of their experiences. Some words can unintentionally shift our focus away from curiosity and towards judgment, encouraging us to make assumptions about a child's intentions rather than describing what we have observed. We risk overlooking the many factors that influence participation, including communication, sensory processing, emotional well-being, relationships, executive functioning, previous experiences, and the environment itself. Again, that list is non-exhaustive. Thoughtful, descriptive language creates space for curiosity, reflection, and understanding. Throughout today's presentation, I hope you've been thinking about the word, perhaps, early attunement, noticing, understanding, tuning into the child, adapting environments, supporting development meaningfully. When we describe children, we should seek to describe the whole child, their interests, their strengths, their relationships, their communication, their curiosity, their joy, their individuality. Every child deserves to be understood fully as their authentic selves. The words we choose matter. Language is one of the most powerful tools we have as early years educators. It can shape our relationships, our understanding, our professional culture. It shapes children's experiences of belonging. Every word has the potential to communicate curiosity or judgment, possibility or limitation, understanding or misunderstanding. When our language reflects dignity, respect, and a genuine desire to understand, it becomes more than communication. It becomes an expression of the values that guide our practice. Every word is an opportunity to help a child feel seen, valued, and understood. What we're trying to do is create cultures where every child belongs. Humanizing language is not about finding perfect words. I can tell you that the language that is referred to as neuroaffirmative today, in 2 years' time, could change, could be different. But what we're trying to do is stay on top of our own knowledge bases, our own learning network, and we're trying to ensure that we're using the most humanizing, humankind language that we can about people in our setting. It's about creating environments where children and families experience dignity, respect, and belonging. Every conversation, every observation, every interaction, every word, it has to be meaningful and it has to be humanizing. Together they shape the neuroaffirmative culture we want to create. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I'm the Director of Autism Advocacy and Professional Practice at Flourish Autism Consultancy and Training. We support early year settings to translate neuroaffirmative principles into meaningful everyday practice. Our professional learning supports educators to strengthen inclusive early years practice, partnership with families, communication and language, neuroaffirmative environments, autism and neurodiversity, regulation, participation, and belonging. You can find out more information about offerings that we have available at www.flourishautismconsultancyandtraining.com. Thanks for listening.